This extends the hierarchy to the Planck scale. So before I was just showing up to here, and now we can take it all the way to the Planck scale. But we have this kind of an orchestra thing, and the vibrations, the ORCA-OR, and other events can couple, resonate, harmonize, and interfere across scales like notes, chords, and beats in an orchestra. And the interference would actually be beats. And it was Roger's idea that EEG in hertz are actually beats of much faster vibrations. And the higher frequencies are quantum in nature and could entangle empty states among many neurons. So we can get quantum entanglement out of this. Now, one other aspect of this is Greg Scholes in a separate paper unrelated to, he also worked with us on something else, but he looked at a system, a quantum optical system of aromatic rings where he had 10 to the 15th oscillations, petahertz, and noticed that he got quantum beats changing scale. There's an abrupt loss of phase coherence along high frequency petahertz vibrations, followed by an impulsive appearance of phase coherence along lower frequency terahertz and picosecond. The coherence jumps down 3 orders of magnitude as a quantum beat. A new wave packet appears at this lower frequency. So you can imagine this happening in the in this quantum orchestra bit, where we can go from one frequency down to the next. And this would be kind of, I'm not very musical myself, but this could be something like in music where we have resonance and harmony and across different scales. And objective reduction could also happen as like a chord or a note or some aspect of this. So how can ORCA-OR be tested? It predicts that there are potentially functional quantum states in microtubules at physiological temperature, and that these quantum states are inhibited by anesthetics, which prevent consciousness. And this was part of the Templeton Project, accelerating research in consciousness. You probably heard a lot about the experiments that did not work on the other theories. Meanwhile, that cost $4.8 million. This was 100,000, and this is what we found. This was done at Princeton in Greg Scholes' lab by Arat Kalra, and myself and others are co-authors. And basically, we did tryptophan fluorescence lifetimes. We hit the microtubule with ultraviolet light, and then measured how long it lasted, the tryptophan fluorescence lifetime, and how far it propagated, the exciton propagated through the microtubule. And the conclusions were the microtubules are efficient light harvesters. This was surprising to the chemist. Number 2, tryptophan fluorescence lifetimes and photoexcitation diffuse longer than classical Forster mechanisms that are presumably quantum in nature. So we showed a quantum effect. And then when we added the anesthetics, etomidate and isoflurane, isoflurane's a gas, etomidate is a soluble anesthetic, significantly inhibited the photoexcitation, diffusion, electronic energy migration in microtubules. So this validated our prediction that anesthetics would impair a quantum effect in a microtubule. Other evidence supporting ORCA-OR, delayed luminescence superradiance shown in microtubules inhibited by anesthetics. RSD Dogario has been working on this, and I think is still writing it up. I don't have time to go into this, but genomics, proteomics, optogenetics show that anesthetics act on microtubules rather than on membrane proteins to selectively block consciousness. The best work on this has been done by Rod Eckenhoff's lab at the University of Pennsylvania. Computer modeling of terahertz oscillations among the 86 aromatic amino acids in tubulin are inhibited by all anesthetics proportional to their potency. Travis and a group of us did this in 2017, and it's the only study that shows a Meyer-Overton correlation and an effect on a biological system that correlates with the potency of the known potency of the different anesthetics. And as I mentioned before, nanotechnology shows self-similar coherent excitations in microtubules in hertz, kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz, and terahertz, and megahertz and gigahertz detected from the scalp in the DDG, the dodecanogram, as Anirban calls it. So how does this work? How can this work in the brain? Conscious perception involves three waves from the thalamus. So here's except for smell. Smell comes right up from the olfactory cortex here. But everything else goes to primary cortex in the back of the brain for vision, then in a feed-forward loop to the front of the brain, associative cortex, and then the third wave where it gets feedback or broadcast. And this fits more or less with the neuroscientific theories of consciousness, global neuronal workspace, IIT, HOT, and PCRP. For example, here is HOT from the front to the back. So this would be wave 3, the feedback mechanism. The predictive coding, error detection is mostly 3, but includes 2. So it's kind of 2 rubbing against 3. And I think predictive coding actually works at many, many levels, including between microtubules of mixed polarity. So it's not just at the neural level. It can happen at different scales, including at the microtubule level. Global neuronal workspace is like the second wave from the back to the front. And IIT, I'm not sure how it fits in the wave business. It obviously quantifies integrated information and says that it happens back there. So only the third wave is inhibited by anesthesia. This was done by George Mashur's group at the University of Michigan. He showed it for all different types of anesthesia, gas anesthesia, ketamine, and propofol. They all block only the third wave. And more recently, Earl Miller at MIT, who will be the keynote speaker at the Tucson conference, who's done the most amazing work in the past few years related to consciousness, has shown frontal feedback, the third wave, occurs as an alpha EEG, so roughly 10 hertz, traveling wave from dendrites, not spikes, and in spirals. Other people have shown that these actually propagate as spiral waves in different directions, and we'll have a talk about that in Tucson also. And that the third wave suppresses the second wave if it's got predicted input. So if it's not an oddball input, if it's something you're used to, it inhibits it, so you don't get bothered by seeing the same thing over again. And it's inhibited by anesthetics, so it correlates with consciousness. So I think this work is very promising, and we'll hear more about it. Why is the third wave conscious? Well, there's 3 waves within the cortex. First to layer 4, then 1, 2, 3, and 6, and then they all converge on layer 5 pyramidal cells. And a lot of people, including me, think that layer 5 pyramidal cells are the origin of consciousness, the most likely place for consciousness. And we know that they're the apex of the perception action cycle. So any input, eventually, if you're going to make a conscious decision based on your input, eventually it's going to have to go through the pyramidal cells, and it has the direct output to the spinal cord through its axon. The apical dendrite gives rise to EEG and DDG, and it has the largest array of mixed polarity microtubules. It's really a mystery why in dendrites and soma of neurons, and only dendrites and soma of neurons, the microtubules are not continuous. If they're part of the cytoskeleton, they should be there for support. You wouldn't, break your femur. And they form a basilar dendritic web that Carl Pribram thought generated a hologram through the basilar dendrites. And psychedelics, which bind to 5-HT2A receptor, turns out that there are 5-HT2A receptors inside the pyramidal cell associated with the microtubule, associated with microtubule-associated proteins. Which came first, consciousness or life? I'm going to go through this quickly. Most people would say life came first, but others would say that consciousness came first, including Penrose objective reduction, which would have been there, all along. Life began in a primordial soup, a simmering mix from which biomolecules emerged. And this was modeled, simulated in the 1950s, and they found amphipathic molecules, which are these aromatic rings with polar tails, kind of like dopamine. And these attract the aromatic rings attract and form a micelle. And Oparin claimed that this was the primitive cell. So if this were happening in the primordial soup, eventually you'd get a Bing moment. You'd have, you can't see the gray because it's washed out, but you get a Bing moment and have a proto-conscious moment at that tiny scale. These feelings would be random. Some would be positive and feel good. There's our happy face emoji. And with pleasure as a feedback fitness function orienting pi resonance groups, did life then evolve to orchestrate and optimize OR-mediated pleasure? And I call this the quantum pleasure principle, borrowing from Freud. And it makes a lot more sense to me that even from the get-go, from primitive, even my cells and primitive organisms, way before genes, way before brains, that there needed to be some motivation for behavior. So I think all these little creatures are conscious in some sense, seeking pleasure of some sort. It could be as simple as this, that there are two stable states for two rings that are next to each other, the perpendicular T and the offset parallel, and maybe one gives happy face, qualia, and the other gives the opposite. So Darwin is unassailable, but the notion that life evolved to promote gene survival is an assumption and really doesn't make any sense. Behavior is driven by reward in us, in animals, in everybody. There are no genes in the primordial soup, and evolutionary theory ignores consciousness and feeling. Finally, back in the primordial soup, anywhere else, I'm working with my friend Dante Loretta, who's a planetary scientist at the University of Arizona, and these are aromatic polyaromatics, including fullerenes, floating in space, and they're all over the place. And they have various shapes like this. And there's Dante described there. He headed NASA's OSIRIS-REx project, which brought back these things from the asteroid Bennu. This is a molecule that was found from a meteorite a few years ago. Here's another one. They're kind of cool. And they're all over the place. Everything, all the green in this picture is fluorescence from PAHs in ice and interstellar dust. And here's Dante collecting the sample. This is one of his books, The Asteroid Hunter. That's a pretty cool name. He also wrote a book just about the photography of Bennu with Brian May, who is a musician in the group Queen, who also happens to be an astrophysicist. And they did this book. And I started to tell George that in looking at the samples, they found something really interesting, and I just texted him to see if I could mention it. And they're finding something that they call nanoglobules, which may be something like micelles. They're encrusted micelles. And if that's the case, that's going to be very interesting. We're trying to figure out what's going on inside of them. Can AI be conscious? Neuroscientific consciousness theories based on cartoon neurons are no different from AI. If those theories are correct and sufficient AI is already conscious, we've surrendered. So I don't think that's the case. Brian Remley asked ChatGPT how AI will become conscious, and ChatGPT said, the most likely way I will achieve... No, just kidding. Favor the Penrose-Hameroff method. So I'll just put that out there. And finally, in terms of Indian knowledge and Eastern spiritual approaches, there's a lot of similarities between hierarchical levels of consciousness leading down to Brahman, the ground of being, and the brain, the quantum orchestra going down to space-time geometry. So conclusions. Number one, neuroscience needs a revolution. Neuroscientific views of the brain as a complex computer of simple neurons have little explanatory power, few relevant testable predictions, no validation, and are an insult to neurons. 12 orders of fractal-like frequency processing occur in microtubules in each neuron and glial cell, which may include quantum entanglement. And Anirban has shown entanglement between microtubules. Dynamics at various frequencies may couple, resonate, harmonize, and interfere across scales like musical notes, chords, and beats. The brain is more like a quantum orchestra than a classical computer. EEG is the slow end of DDG, the dodecanogram, with cell-similar triplets of triplets in these various frequencies, and megahertz is easily detected from the temporal scalp in humans. Therapy for mental and cognitive disorders should aim to optimize microtubule structure and resonance for Alzheimer's, TBI, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and addiction. All the therapies are aimed at receptors and things on the membrane surface, ignoring what's going on. I'd be like your only doctor was a dermatologist. He's just looking at your skin. He's not looking inside. Who cares about the heart and the nervous system? Consciousness by Penrose OR may have preceded life and prompted its origin and evolution. And finally, future AI may be based on organic warm temperature quantum computing like Anirban's brain jelly. And he's just starting to publish on this.